My house doesn't have a basement. A lot of homes like mine, especially older ones, have crawl spaces instead. These narrow, low-clearance gaps sit just beneath the lower level of the house, usually no more than 5 feet high. They're typically used for storage, but truthfully, they've always creeped me out. It all started on a night that felt just like any other. I had classes early the next morning, so I made sure to get to bed at a decent hour. My bedroom is on the first floor, directly above the crawlspace. After shutting off the TV, probably around 11, I slipped under the covers and turned off the light. Just as I began to settle in, I heard something, a faint, irregular sound coming from beneath me. At first, I thought maybe I imagined it, but no, it was real. The noise was coming from directly underneath my bed. Everyone else in the house was already asleep. My parents, my brother, doors shut, lights off, the quiet hum of a resting household. Calling out to them now would have been overkill. So I sat there in silence, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But curiosity and a twinge of unease got the better of me. I slid off the bed and got down onto the carpet, knees pressing into the fibers. Slowly, cautiously, I lifted the hanging sheet and peered under the bed. I held my breath, half expecting to see a rat or something worse. But there was nothing, just dust, the wooden frame, and the still darkness underneath. Relieved, I crawled back under the covers, trying to shake it off. That's when the sound came back. It was louder this time, less subtle, a rough, scraping kind of sound, like something being dragged. Then a pause, then another pull. It didn't sound like random creaking or a house settling. It sounded deliberate, like someone or something was working at something directly beneath me. My heart started to pick up. Again, I slipped out of bed and dropped to the floor, bracing myself. I slowly leaned down and checked under the bed once more. Still nothing, just the same empty space. But what chilled me most was how the sound stopped each time I moved. The moment I got up, it went completely silent, as if it was listening too. Unable to shake the sound from my mind, I finally got up and went to get my dad. It was late and I felt kind of stupid for bothering him, but the unease gnawed at me too much to ignore. He followed me back into my room, groggy and half squinting. I pointed toward the bed, explaining what I'd heard. With a sigh, he got down on one knee and took a look underneath, just like I had. Of course, figures, the noise had completely stopped by then. Nothing but silence and shadows. He sat back on his heels and gave me a tired look. "Probably nothing," he said, "but I'll check the crawlspace tomorrow. Could be a pipe or something making noise." A pipe? I hadn't even thought about that. I didn't connect it to the crawlspace at all. I guess I was just too focused on the fact that it sounded like it was right under me. But the rest of that night? Quiet. I fell asleep easily, almost forgetting how unsettled I'd felt earlier. The next day, after class, I came home and stepped into my room like normal, except something caught my eye. Something odd was sticking out from underneath my bed. Curious, I bent down and pulled it out. It was a plastic bag, tied loosely at the top and filled with old papers. Stuff from elementary school, my handwriting, crayon drawings, spelling tests. Some of it was yellowed with age. I stared at it for a second, confused. Why would that be under my bed? I figured maybe my mom had come across some of my old school stuff during spring cleaning and stuck it there to show me later. I planned to ask her about it, but I was too tired to deal with it just then. Besides, it felt pointless to keep it. So I decided I'd just toss it down into the crawlspace and be done with it. The entrance to our crawlspace is inside the garage, a small, square wooden door set low in the back wall. During the summer months, my dad often leaves the garage door wide open to get fresh air while he works. That way, he doesn't have to keep the lights on or feel cooped up in the heat. That detail didn't really strike me as important at the time, but it would. Later that night, somewhere in the middle of the night I think, I woke up again. Not to silence this time, but to sound. Not from under the bed, but from below the floor. The noises were different now, clearer, sharper, like faint rustling, shifting. I couldn't explain it, but something about the way the sound traveled through the floor made it feel like whatever was making it was closer than ever. Too close. And this time, I knew. Something was in the crawlspace, and it was moving. The second I turned on my bedside lamp, I bolted from the room. My heart was hammering in my chest as I ran to wake my dad. He groaned when I shook him awake, clearly irritated that I was dragging him out of bed again. But when he saw the look on my face, the fear I couldn't hide, he didn't ask questions. Still half asleep, he led me downstairs, through the kitchen, and into the garage. The air was heavy and still, faintly smelling of oil and dust. We stopped in front of the crawlspace door, an old wooden hatch set low into the wall. My dad unlocked it, then reached up to grab the flashlight hanging from a rusty hook nearby. With a flick, the beam pierced the darkness ahead. We both crouched down and peered inside.
At first, everything looked still, quiet. The beam of light danced across the low ceiling, the uneven dirt floor, and a few plastic storage bins stacked near the entrance. But then we saw something. A faint glow across the far side of the crawlspace. A soft, pale light was seeping through from above. But that made no sense. There weren't supposed to be any openings in the floor. There shouldn't have been any light. My dad frowned, and without a word, Crouch walked his way through the narrow space, the flashlight bobbing in his hand. I stayed back by the entrance, watching nervously as he made his way toward the strange glow. Then, he screamed. It wasn't just a startled yelp, it was a full-throated, soul-rattling scream of pure terror. I froze. Hearing that sound, my father screaming like that, was more disturbing than anything I'd ever experienced. It sent chills through every inch of me. I didn't know what he'd seen. I didn't want to know. Then he shouted, his voice ragged, panicked. "Open the garage door! Get out of the house, now!" I didn't argue. I ran, hit the button, and sprinted out into the driveway, breath fogging in the night air. I stood there shaking, barefoot on the cold concrete, listening. From inside, I heard shouting, movement, something crashing. Then, a scream. My mom. My stomach dropped. I took a step forward, then stopped, not knowing what to do. 5 agonizing minutes later, the garage door creaked open again. My dad and older brother emerged, wrestling with someone between them. A stranger. They were holding him tight, one of them gripping his arm while the other forced him forward. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't struggling anymore, but the way his head hung low, the way his feet dragged, it chilled me. Another 5 minutes later, red and blue lights lit up the neighborhood. A police car rolled up to the curb and our quiet street erupted into motion. Neighbors came outside, staring, whispering. Some approached the edge of our lawn, confused and wide-eyed. Now, let me explain what happened. When my dad reached that glow in the crawlspace and looked up, he found a massive hole, a jagged, gaping hole cut right into the floor, directly beneath my bed. And staring down at him through that opening was a masked man. My dad barely had time to react, but somehow he reached up and grabbed the man's arms, trying to pull him down or keep him from getting away. That's when he screamed for my older brother. And thankfully, my brother came. Together, they overpowered the intruder, held him there until help arrived. And thank God they did, because that man wasn't just hiding. He had a gun. When I was 21, still living at home with my parents, my bedroom was, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly designed to be a bedroom. Technically, it was an extra room, more of a downstairs storage space than anything else. No insulation, one small window, and the kind of creaky floor that always seemed to echo a little too loudly at night. But I was the youngest of 3, and by the time I was old enough to claim a room, the good ones were long gone. My 2 older brothers had already moved out by then, off living their own lives. I was still wrapping up my last stretch of college, stuck at home over winter break, and yeah, lucky me, I had the worst room in the house. To make things more surreal, my parents weren't even home that week. Dad was off on one of his business trips, somewhere halfway across the country. My mom, she was in another state entirely, spending time with friends. That's how they've always been, those kinds of parents who seem more like roommates you rarely run into. Even when we were little, we mostly raised ourselves. So for a few days, I had the whole place to myself. Now here's where things get a little uncomfortable. My room, the converted storage space, just so happens to connect directly to the crawlspace of our house. There's a little pull-off panel in the wall, about the size of a vent cover, tucked in behind an old shelf near my bed. It's always been there. When I was a kid, my brothers used to mess with me about it constantly.
They'd tell me stories, whispers in the dark about aliens hiding in the walls, or monsters crawling out at night from that little black square. I'd lie awake sometimes, wide-eyed in the dark, convinced I could hear something moving around in there, just faint scratches or distant thuds coming from the other side of the wall. Even the tiniest noise would send chills through me. But I eventually outgrew that fear, of course. At least I thought I had. I was just hanging out in my room, trying to grind through the last of my assignments before winter break officially ended. My desk was cluttered with notebooks and half-finished coffee, and the air had that dry winter stillness to it, the kind that makes every little sound feel sharper than it should. That's when I heard it. A noise, muffled, low, and close. It came from the crawl space, literally from beyond the wall right next to my bed. It wasn't a bump or knock or even anything mechanical. It was vocal, muddled and strange, like a mouth moving just out of earshot. Not clear enough to understand, but too intentional to be anything random. Something about it made my chest tighten immediately. My heart kicked into high gear, pounding in my ears as I sat frozen in place, trying to make sense of it. I was alone. No dad to call down for backup, no big brothers to play hero. It was just me. And that sound. I stood slowly, every instinct screaming at me to do the opposite. I crossed the room and knelt by the crawlspace door, a small square panel fitted loosely into the wall. My hand hovered for a second, then I pulled it open. The darkness inside felt unnatural, like it swallowed up the light leaking from my bedroom. I pulled out my phone and flicked on the flashlight, angling it into the crawlspace. The narrow beam danced across insulation, dusty floorboards, and old forgotten storage bins. I stayed at the threshold, just peering inside while the cold air drifted out toward me. I had no idea what I was expecting to see. A rodent? A person? Nothing? But I saw nothing. No movement, no figure hunched in a corner, just stillness. And yet, the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. I hesitated, took a step back, then forward again. I was actually debating whether I should crawl in just a little deeper when suddenly I heard it. A voice. Sometimes. I nearly collapsed from the jolt it shot through me. It was a garbled, slow drawl, way too close, like it had just echoed out from the dark. My body locked up as I struggled to breathe. And then, clarity. The voice continued, something like, "Sometimes I get carried away." I stood frozen for a full 3 seconds before I realized, thank God, what it was. It was one of those old talking Bubba toys. You know, those battery-powered novelty hunting dolls from the 90s with motion sensors or pressure plates that made them say random lines in that deep southern drawl. Up-tempo speaking, the sound had come from somewhere in the pile of old storage back there, buried in forgotten boxes, untouched for years. I didn't know what had triggered it. Maybe something shifted just enough to press the button, maybe a falling object or something else. But still, why now? Why that moment? I backed away from the opening, trying to laugh it off, but the chill crawling up my spine told me I wasn't really laughing. I waited by the crawlspace door, gripping the edge of it tightly, heart still racing from the talking Bubba's sudden outburst. The voice continued its slow, broken phrases from somewhere in the dark. And then, finally, it stopped. Silence flooded back into the room, and with a shaky breath, I closed the door. I pressed it shut until the soft click of the latch reassured me, then turned and crawled back into bed. I tried to tell myself it was over. When it was time to finally sleep, I shut my laptop, switched off the bedside light, and rolled onto my side beneath the covers. The room was bathed in a deep, heavy darkness, thick with stillness, except for the occasional groan of the house settling in the cold. I had almost convinced myself to relax when it went off again. That familiar garbled voice broke through the silence. From inside the crawlspace. This time, now that I knew what it was, the sound was even clearer and somehow more disturbing. The voice dragged out the same phrase, slow and mechanical, echoing through the thin wall beside me like a whisper in a crypt. That was it. I'd had enough. There was no way I was sleeping with that thing talking all night. Determined now, I got out of bed and crossed the room, flicked on my phone's flashlight again, and opened the crawlspace door. The air that greeted me was colder than before, still, stale, and just faintly damp. I dropped down to my hands and knees and slipped inside, brushing past some boxes and bins. The voice triggered again, guiding me through the clutter. Deeper in the crawlspace, I spotted a large, crumpled brown paper bag half covered by a dusty blanket. The sound was coming from inside it. I reached out, slow, cautious. But before my fingers could touch the bag, 2 arms lunged out of the darkness. Not toy arms, not fake, real. They shot out, stretched unnaturally forward, reaching for me with desperate, violent speed. And behind them, a scream, deep, raw, and inhuman. It ripped through the narrow crawlspace, echoing like it had nowhere else to go. I let out a scream of my own, pure panic, scrambling backward, crawling as fast as I could toward the opening. My limbs were clumsy and slow, the confined space working against me. I reached the door and threw myself out, grabbing the handle and slamming it shut with everything I had. Then I locked it. Thank God it had a lock. For a split second, all was still. Then, bang! Something on the other side slammed into the door. 2 seconds later, bang! Again and again. Perfect rhythm, every 2 seconds. I didn't wait to see if the door would hold. I ran. I was already upstairs by the time I got through to the police. My hands were shaking as I held the phone to my ear, still catching my breath from what had just happened. I could barely focus on what the dispatcher was saying. My mind was still stuck on those arms and that guttural scream in the crawlspace. Then I noticed something. The banging downstairs had stopped. The house was silent again, unnervingly silent. The dispatcher's voice pulled me back, calm but firm. Lock yourself in a room if you're staying inside, or get somewhere safe, like your car or a neighbor's house. Officers are on the way. I wasn't about to stay in that house, not after what I saw. I thanked her quickly, hung up, grabbed the spare keys from the keyring, and made a beeline for the front door. Outside, the cold air hit me hard, like stepping into a different world. I hurried to my car, got inside, locked the doors, and dropped into the seat with a heavy breath. The interior was quiet, the only sound my shallow breathing and the occasional tick of the cooling engine. From where I was parked along the curb, I had a partial view of the back corner of the house. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. That's when I noticed it. A door, open. On the side of the house, barely visible behind some shrubs, was the outside crawlspace door. It was wide open. Not ajar, not cracked, completely unlatched, hanging there like an invitation. My stomach sank. Of course. That explained everything. That's how someone got in. The door must have been left unlocked, probably by my dad without realizing. It wouldn't have taken much. A single mistake, a forgotten latch, and whoever was in the crawlspace had taken full advantage of it. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, clutching my phone in both hands, still connected to 911. My voice was low, urgent. Please tell the officers to hurry. The crawlspace door on the side of the house is open. They might still be inside. The dispatcher assured me help was moments away, but I couldn't shake the thought. I hadn't seen anyone leave. No shadow slipping out, no figure darting through the yard. But that didn't mean they were still in there. For all I knew, they could be long gone. The police car finally came roaring down the street, sirens off, but lights flashing blue and red across the quiet neighborhood. It pulled up right in front of my house. I was out of my car before the wheels even stopped turning. "Over here," I called out, waving him toward me. "The crawlspace, there's a door on the side of the house." The officer followed without hesitation. I pointed directly at the open hatch, and he nodded, drawing his flashlight and stepping inside. I stayed close, not too close to get in the way, but enough to peek my head in and shine my phone's flashlight alongside his, making sure every dark corner was lit. I didn't want to leave any room for mistakes. I even spoke up a few times, suggesting he check the bigger boxes and bags piled along the back. There were too many blind spots, places someone could be hiding. To my surprise, the officer didn't brush me off. He was calm, patient, actually listened to what I said. Maybe it was the urgency in my voice. Maybe he could tell I wasn't just being paranoid. He checked everything, one by one, lifting lids, shifting bags, pushing bins aside. After a few long minutes that felt like hours, he finally stepped back out. "The crawlspace is empty," he said, keeping his voice even. "Whoever was in there is long gone. They must have slipped out before I arrived." I nodded, trying to process the relief, but it didn't feel like enough. There was still that detail I couldn't shake. The crawlspace door could only be locked from the inside or with a key from the outside. And right now, I didn't want to risk leaving it unsecured again. So I asked him, "Can you wait here for just a second? I want to go in and lock the door from the inside." He agreed. I stepped back into the crawlspace one last time, phone light in hand, eyes scanning every corner even though I already knew it was empty. But as I moved through the tight space, reaching for the interior latch, I felt it. That unmistakable feeling, a low, crawling sensation in my gut, like eyes were on me, like something unseen was watching from the shadows just beyond the reach of my light. I locked the door as quickly as I could. Then I climbed out, sealed the panel behind me, and hurried back upstairs. Back to my room, where I locked that door too. The officer gave a short wave before leaving a few minutes later, headlights vanishing down the street. I got into bed, but I didn't even try to sleep. I just lay there in the dark, the door locked tight, listening to every creak, every whisper of wind through the walls. My eyes didn't close once. Not until sunlight crept through the window the next morning. And even though no one ever broke into the crawlspace again, I guess I can't really call it breaking in. The door had been unlocked the whole time, and someone had taken full advantage of that. It was 2016 and I had just signed the lease on my very first house. Alone. It wasn't anything fancy, definitely a fixer-upper, but it was mine. A starter home with creaky floors, uneven paint, and a yard that needed work. Still, it had potential. And the neighborhood? Surprisingly decent. Quiet, safe, nothing out of the ordinary. By the end of the first day, I had already memorized the layout. By the third day, I was fully settled in. Boxes unpacked, furniture arranged, routine beginning to form. But by the fourth day, things started to feel different. That's when I began hearing noises, strange ones. Not loud crashes or footsteps, just faint, irregular sounds echoing through the house at night. There was a small upstairs section, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom tucked neatly above the main floor. The first floor was simple, living room, dining room, and kitchen. What struck me as odd was that I only ever heard the noises when I was downstairs. Whenever I was upstairs, silence. But downstairs, especially in the late hours, I'd hear faint sounds coming from beneath the floor. I remembered the house technically had a basement, though calling it that was generous. It was just one small room tucked beneath the kitchen, barely large enough to hold a washer and dryer. Nothing more than a cramped laundry space. Still, the noise had to be coming from somewhere. One night, curiosity got the best of me. I went down to the basement, hoping to trace the source. Maybe it was a leaky pipe, a mouse, something simple. I stood in the middle of the tiny room, listening. There was no one there, no sign of movement, but the sound persisted. Not from the floor above, not from the machines, from inside the wall. A slow, soft noise, shuffling, like something brushing against drywall from the other side. I ran my hand along the surface, pressing against it gently. And then, hollow. A section of the wall gave a different echo, faint but unmistakable. There was a void, a space on the other side, which could only mean one thing. There was some kind of room hidden back there, and someone was making noise from inside it. In the far corner of the basement, I noticed something, an odd recess where the wall jutted back farther than the rest of the room. It looked like nothing at first, just a narrow, shadowed nook, the kind of space you'd maybe toss a broom or a bucket into and forget about. But something about it pulled me in. I walked over slowly, expecting it to be just a cramped area for storage. But when I got closer, I saw it. There was a door, tucked inside that tiny opening. An old, narrow wooden door that blended almost perfectly with the basement walls. The frame was tight, just enough clearance to pull it open without it scraping the ceiling above. I hesitated, hand on the handle. Then I opened it. It creaked low and dry as it swung inward. The space beyond was pitch black, not the kind of dark your eyes adjust to after a few seconds. This was the kind of black that felt like it swallowed light. Even standing at the threshold, I couldn't see anything beyond the doorway, just a cold draft leaking out, brushing against my face. Whatever sound I'd been hearing earlier, gone, vanished the second the door opened. But I could still tell, just from the way the faint light from the basement stretched into the space, that the ceiling inside was higher than I expected. Not tall, but maybe just enough to stand upright with a slight crouch. So it wasn't just a crawlspace. It was more like a hidden passage, or a sealed-off section of the house no one had touched in years. I stood there a moment longer, the silence heavy, the shadows waiting. And then I shut the door. There was no way I was going in there at night. I turned, headed back upstairs, and made sure to lock the basement door behind me, just in case. I called it a night after that. Didn't even bother thinking too hard about it. The next few days, totally normal. I went about my routine, didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. Life settled back into its quiet rhythm. But then, one night, while I was doing laundry in the basement, I heard it again. Faint, subtle, just a noise or two. Nothing loud or jarring, just soft movement in the background, like a pipe groaning or something shifting in the walls. And for a second, I convinced myself it was nothing. Probably the boiler, or maybe just the house settling. Yeah, probably. The next night, everything changed. I was just sitting in the living room, unwinding after a long day. TV on, lights dim, when I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. 3 heavy impacts, sharp, deliberate, like something or someone had dropped to the floor above me. Not the ceiling creaking, not distant plumbing. These were thuds, direct, controlled. And just like that, my blood went cold. My body kicked into fight or flight mode, and adrenaline surged through me. This wasn't just weird house noise anymore. Someone was in my home. I jumped up, stormed into the kitchen, and yanked open the drawer where I kept the biggest knife I owned. My hands were already trembling, but I gripped the handle tight, like holding it tighter would make me less afraid. I tried to psych myself up, forced myself to think angry. I had to look furious, had to act like I wasn't terrified out of my mind. But deep down, I was shaking in my own skin. I made my way downstairs like a storm, each step pounding beneath me as I headed straight for the Crawlspace door. This time, I wasn't going to creep or hesitate. I flicked on my flashlight, yanked the door open, and started shouting into the darkness. Yelling like I meant business, yelling like I wasn't afraid. The light cut into the cold, stale air of the crawlspace, the beam flickering against the walls and the dusty floor. I stepped inside, every nerve in my body on edge, my grip on the knife tightening by the second. But the moment I entered, it hit me. The space was empty. Utterly, completely empty. Except for 2 cardboard boxes, flattened and abandoned in a corner. I turned in a full circle, once, twice, 3 times. I probably spun around 5 times total, sweeping the flashlight across every inch of the walls, the ceiling, the corners behind the boxes. I knew there was no one there. Not a shadow, not a breath, nothing. But the sound I'd heard upstairs, that feeling of presence, it was real. I was sure of it. And yet, there I stood, alone, knife in one hand, light in the other, surrounded by silence. And then, something shattered the silence. It was faint but unmistakable, breathing, coming from no more than 20 feet away. A slow, deliberate inhale, then exhale, ragged, heavy, human. My body locked up. I turned toward the sound, heart slamming in my chest, and there it was. In the far corner of the crawlspace, something was standing there, just standing. A figure, not moving, not making a sound beyond that awful labored breathing. It was impossible. I had searched this space 5 times over, 5 full rotations. I had shined my flashlight into every shadow, every corner, and there had been nothing there, no one. But now, something was. I couldn't even tell what it was. Man, woman, something else? All I knew was that it was wrong. My feet wouldn't move. My hand tightened around the knife, but I didn't feel brave anymore, just cold and small and frozen in place. And then I felt it. This terrifying certainty. The figure wasn't just there, it was getting closer. Without a sound. No footsteps, no shifting, just that feeling. A presence closing the space between us like the walls themselves were breathing with it. That's when my body finally caught up with my fear. I ran. I bolted for the crawlspace door, nearly tripping as I scrambled through it and slammed it shut behind me. Outside, I spun around, heart racing, searching for anything to block the door. A heavy box, a chair, something. but there was nothing nearby. So I turned and ran again, up the stairs, through the house, slamming the basement door shut and locking it behind me. I didn't stay another second. That night, I drove straight to my parents' house and stayed there, still shaking as I lay in my old bed, unable to sleep. The next morning, I called the landlord, actually harassed him, told him I was done. I didn't care about contracts or penalties. I needed out of that lease. It wasn't easy. He pushed back, told me I was overreacting, that I was probably just imagining things in an old house that needed work, but I refused to budge. And after enough shouting and back and forth, he relented. Within the week, I was out, gone. But here's the thing. For the rest of that week, while I packed up, I never once went back into the basement. Not once. But every night when I sat in the living room, I could still hear it. Faint noises coming from down below. Like something was still there, waiting.